Hi, I'm Johnathon Bush. I'm with Truth to Heart Ministries, a ministry out of Southside Baptist Church in Winter Haven, Florida. I am here with Keith Foskey. You probably recognize his face. Keith Foskey is all over the internet. He has really been, I joke around with you, but honestly, it is a blessing to see you out there and the way you've been able to minister through humor, through your debates. So tell us a little bit about yourself first. For those that, I think everybody knows you, but
I don't know. Some people don't. It's been funny because I've been very thankful for how the ministry has expanded, and it has been through humor. Mm-hmm. The comedy stuff has really connected with people, but that's the thing. Sometimes people only think is that it's humor. But I've been in the same church for 18 years. I pastor Sovereign Grace Family Church, where I became the pastor in 2006. So, and it's the same church I grew up in. So the church I grew up in is the church I pastor. I've been in the same church really actually for almost 40 years. Okay. And so God saved me when I was 19 years old, called into the ministry when I was 21. The church afforded me the opportunity to go to a local seminary, which was Jacksonville Baptist Theological Seminary, which was not reformed in any way. In fact, I was told Calvinism kills churches.
Oh, yep, me too.
But by God's grace, He used that opportunity in my life to teach me how to study. Mm-hmm. Going to seminary didn't make my theology what it is. Going to seminary made me go to the Word. Yeah. Taught me how to study the Word, and then my theology grew out of that. And so about 4 years ago, we started a podcast when everybody started a podcast, because right around COVID, they started selling these microphones.
Yeah, oh yeah. They got lucrative business right there.
Absolutely, and it worked out really well. First year, nobody was paying attention. Second, third year, we got a little bit of traction, but about a year and a half ago, we started doing some comedy videos, and for whatever reason, they connected with people, and now we've expanded a little bit.
So your main comedy was, and I remember starting to see them on Facebook, because I'm going to need your help, and hopefully you'll help me with my social media presence. But so what really set you off was your denominational videos, is that right?
Yes, absolutely. Still by far the top thing that we do. And I currently we are sitting at our 33rd, I think, denominational meeting, because that's what they're called. It's a series of videos. Started out with the first one, and it was my wife's idea, because there were all these short videos online. Everybody was doing 30-second, 40-second videos. And my wife said, wouldn't it be funny if all the denominations were sitting around a table talking to each other, and you could dress up like the different ones? So I went and got a bow tie, dressed up like a Presbyterian. I got a hoodie and dressed up like a Big Eva, what we call Big Eva, which is the, like mega church pastor. Right. And the Baptist had a blue polo, nothing fancy. It was just different outfits. Well, those have become the costumes. My kids say, Daddy, you going to your costume drawer today, or costume box? Because I got them all in a box. Right. And so it's my costume box. And we just started writing these videos. Well, the first one hit 90,000 views in one day. And that was really the kickoff. That said, okay, people like this. This is funny. Yeah. So I did another one the next week. It didn't do as good. And I was like, well, maybe it was just a fluke. But it didn't stop me. I did a third one. The third one really took off. But the one that made it, I call it the shot heard around the world, was when I did the denominations go shooting. And,
I remember that.
And I had a guy from South America. He was a friend of mine who was on missions trip in South America. He called me. He goes, hey, I'm in South America, and this guy just walked up to me with his phone and said, you should see this, it's funny. And it was me.
Really?
And so he said, your video made it to South America. I was like, oh, well, that's funny. So that kind of showed me that the humor, there was a place for it. People actually liked it. It made the rounds. And so now it's evolved into more things. I do a news show, which is called Church Soup, which is all humor. But it's satire. That Church Soup is more about pointing out the errors in church, but doing it in a funny way. Yeah. You got churches that have monster trucks in the sanctuary and stuff, and all this silliness. And so I just make fun of it. Yeah. And I truly believe that humor has a value in it's not just making people laugh, but it's another way to point out if something is an error. Mm-hmm. You can just stand back and say, that's wrong. Or you can make fun of it in a way that shows the error by using humor to make people think this is wrong and it's funny. And people say, well, is that right? I think so. I think satire is in Scripture. I think we see even the Lord using things in his ministry that were intended to point out the error in a way that is, I hate to use the word sarcasm, but it really is.
Well, Elijah on Mount Carmel.
Well, Elijah on Mount Carmel is the precipice of it. Well, was your God on the toilet?
Some things deserve to be mocked.
That's right.
I think so.
And I do think that there was mocking tones in certain aspects of Christ's interaction with the Pharisees. It was just that he was pointing out their error in a way that was just sarcastic, but for a point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think the same could be said of some of the things that Paul has said in his letters that some people have pointed out. So tell me, I would agree with that. I think it's now. Let me just make this disclaimer for anybody who's watching who's never heard actual sermon by Keith. Keith's very serious-minded. You're very serious-minded. When you get up and it's time to open the Word of God, he's very humble. He's very serious about the Scripture. So it's not that you take these things lightly.
Not at all.
Right? But let me ask you this: what has been? Because you and I have talked a little bit just in group settings and stuff where you have mentioned some of the negative responses that you've gotten as far as should you or shouldn't you say certain things?
Yeah, I mean, there are certain people who would say humor is not something a pastor should be engaging in because it's not fit for a man who's supposed to be sober-minded, and they'll often point to, well, this is just not you don't strike me as a man who's sober-minded or temperate. And I say, well, I don't think that that's true. And now I'm going to quote a Catholic, so forgive me, everybody. You can, I would say, be careful. No, but G.K. Chesterton was known for being able to just have wonderful quotes. He's a very quotable man. And he said that funny is not the opposite of serious. Funny is the opposite of not funny.
Yeah.
And so his point was because someone was accusing him of not being a serious man because he was a funny person. He would make funny remarks. He would make satirical remarks, and that, well, you're just not a serious-minded person. He said, no, funny's not the opposite of serious. Funny's the opposite of not funny. Yeah. If I say something that's not funny, it's just not funny.
Right.
But if I'm using humor to point out something, then yeah, it can be serious and funny, and sometimes even more like hard-hitting. And I'll point to somebody else who's not altogether popular in every circle, and that is Doug Wilson. I don't know how you...
Well, aren't you the Harbor Freight Doug
I am the Harbor Freight Doug Wilson, and that's a whole joke in and of itself. Doug has endorsed me as the Harbor Freight Doug Wilson. Yeah. So it's not just a gag. I'm the official Harbor Freight version. But Doug said in a sermon, the sermon is actually online. It's called Winsome Tartness. And what he said in the sermon was, let's say you face something in life that's incredibly ridiculous. Like, let's say there's someone who is just, like we all know the trans stuff, and somebody who's, a man who's obviously a man, but he's wearing lipstick and, has the hair and wearing a dress.
Right.
And he's demanding that you identify him as a woman.
Okay.
And you can do that and give in, which that's up to you if you do that. I don't want to do that.
Nope.
You can take him through a 45-minute explanation as to the ontology of human beings and male and female, or you can just look at him and say, I don't think so, Skippy. And that's it. Like, right. I'm not going to play your game. And when he said that, when Doug said that, when he said, I don't think so, Skippy, that registered with me. Because he said, you're saying all of that in one sentence and you don't have to explain it.
That's it.
I'm not going to play your game.
Yeah.
I'm just going to tell you, I don't think so, Skippy.
Yeah.
So I always thought that was very useful.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's when they are, and this is a rabbit hole, but I would just say when they are demanding you do that, they're actually demanding for you to ridicule them.
Yeah.
In a sense, just no, I'm not going to.
I'm not going to do it.
Yeah, I'm not going to do it. And so you just let's just stay with this subject on humor. Where would you? I think there is a line that we can cross, especially in the ministry, especially let's say this behind the pulpit, because you're here at our church. We're doing the Behold Our God conference. You're going to be back with us next year. We'll talk about that toward the tail end of this. But all of the messages were very serious-minded, but I think you added a little bit of humor in yours. I added a little bit in mine, and Virgil added some in his, in an otherwise serious message. And you said, or what Virgil said, and I think this kind of goes into play with using it for really a serious purpose. Virgil quoted the theologian Justin Bieber today.
Yes, that was funny.
He quoted the theologian Oprah Winfrey and the theologian Ariana Grande. But what he was doing was he was pointing out that these are quote-unquote Christian or quasi-Christian people, who some of whom attend church, but it's like Bethel and all that kind of nonsense.
That's exactly right.
And then they have a platform, and they say ridiculous things like love is love is love. And he used that. It was humorous, but it was to point out a serious error that exists in the church today. And so where and I know this is kind of a question that may be unanswerable, but where do you draw the line as far as that goes?
Well, that's a really important question, because I love what Virgil was doing, and he was doing exactly what I think he should do, and that is you're pointing to the ridiculousness of something by exaggerating it. Mm-hmm. As I was preparing for my sermon, which was on the holiness of God, I couldn't help going back and listening to some of the old R.C. Sproul lessons that he gave on the holiness of God, just in preparation. You're listening to things.
Best guy to listen to for that.
Absolutely. Well, I couldn't help but recognize how much humor he would give. And some of it was almost like, it was like stand-up comedy type stuff. I mean, It really was. R.C. was such a personable guy. Mm-hmm. And he was at a conference, it wasn't Ligonier. He was a guest at somebody else's conference because he kept referencing the host. It wasn't his own conference. And he made so many funny remarks. At one point, it was almost like he was riffing, like you think of a comedian.
Right.
And I was like, he's going a little far here, but who's going to tell RC?
Right.
He went far. But obviously, in a conference, you're in a little different context than Sunday morning worship pulpit, right. So I think that's where there was a little bit of exaggeration in his humor. But the point that I'm making is, some people, when they say there's no place for humor in the pulpit, I say, tell R.C. Sproul that.
Right.
Tell Vodi Bakum that.
Yeah.
The reason why we know that dog won't hunt, the reason why we know if you can't say amen, say ouch,
right.
is because we've all heard Vodi say it, and we all laughed when he said it. There's a place for humor, but what is not funny is when you replace the message with humor.
Yeah.
It's one thing to take the message and accentuate it through something that might be humorous, an anecdote or a story, or as R.C. Sproul, in one of them, he was talking about how Baptists, you have to say, when you turn to your Bible, you have to say, turn to Mark chapter 1, verse 3. He said, we just say Mark 3:1. He said, but Baptists need extra time to get there.
That's funny.
And I said, okay, well, that's funny.
Yeah.
And that's a joke. And of course, it's a room mixed with Baptists.
And if you have a good sense of humor as a Baptist, you can take that.
Yeah. And it didn't add anything to the message, but it certainly added a connection point between him and the audience.
Yeah.
One of the things that RC did teach, I actually got to sit in on some of his lessons for pastors. He used to host a pastor's conference. And I got to sit in on a few of those. And one of the things, he despised using notes. He used to give Steve Lawson a hard time. He would say, Steve, I'm going to steal your notes and make you preach without them, because he believed that the best way to connect with people was simply to preach and to have not be tied to any notes. He said the only notes he brings, he says, if I don't want to forget a date, I'll write a date down and bring it up.
Wow.
But everything else was straight from. Very few people have that gift,
right?
To have no notes at all and just
Well, I mean, some of the Pentecostal charismatics have that gift.
To do it as well as he did.
Right.
He
Be sound.
Yes, he was encyclopedic in his knowledge.
Oh, yeah.
But the point he was making is we are communicators. We are communicating the word of God to the people of God. We are being used by God as an instrument of communication. And this, if our notes are a wall to communication, then do your best to eliminate them. Do your best to communicate as best you can. And there's all kinds of ways that you can communicate truth as a way to connect with people. And I'm not saying go take a course from the Toastmasters or something like that.
Right.
But there are things you can learn from communicators. I do stand-up comedy. People know this. It's not something I hide. I do stand-up comedy because I like the art form of storytelling. Mm-hmm. And if you learn to be a better storyteller, if you learn to be a better communicator, and you can't have notes when you're doing stand-up comedy, it's all got to be memorized or coming out of you. You learn to better connect with people in what you're saying. There's value in that.
I think that's what I got out before I got to know you. I think that one of those things is you can see that, the first interaction, or as far as the first introduction to a guy like you is I see the viral stuff, but then it's like, okay, well, I care enough to look into this guy and see, is he all just fun and games, or is he legit? And you find out that no, man. I mean, you're Dr. Keith Foskey.
That's a secret. We don't tell anybody.
Okay,
that.
so I'll edit that.
No, you don't have to. I'm just kidding. It's on the sign. Our elders made me put it on the sign. Well, if you go to our church, it says Dr. Medford Keith Foskey. That's my first name.
Yeah, and I'm not going to rail on you for that, just even in sarcasm, because you genuinely exude humility, and I say that not to stroke your ego, but just I was really impressed with that when I first met you. I even told my wife, I said, man, he's a humble guy, and you're serious. You're not all just fun and games. And when you go and I listen to your debates, and I listen to and I'm not stalking you, but I want to, before I invite a guy to preach, I want to know,
as you should,
a little bit about him.
Absolutely.
And so I found out you weren't a Presbyterian, which surprised me.
That's again, it's a secret. You turn that.
But anyway, I'm like, man, this guy's solid. This guy is educated. This guy is serious about the work of the Lord. And I know you do open air evangelism. You have books that you've written, and some, very sound debates. You're friends with James White and some of these other guys. And so I really, what that showed me is, man, you got this guy who he's really solid. He's educated, but he's not disconnected from the average everyday Christian. Because honestly, sometimes you look, and I could name names, and you'd probably agree, there are some guys out there that, man, they are rock solid, and they are impressive, and they are and not this isn't a criticism, it's just an observation. But there's just a disconnect between them and just the everyday guy. They can hang out with the brilliant theologians, but man, I would just be nervous around them. You know what I mean? But I think humor kind of breaks that ice, and it brings you to the everyman status,
And that's where I hope to stay. I just want to be. I'm thankful. One of the best parts of any of this, going viral and stuff, the best part has been I make my website available and people can email me. And I have been emailed by so many people who just said, you seem like somebody I can ask this to. You seem like somebody who will, and I try to answer these emails. I get a lot, and I'm trying to now figure out a way to manage them all. But people feel like I can talk to them. And I'm like, that's what I want. I want to be accessible in that way as much as I can. Obviously, the most important people in my life are my family and my church. But the number one people who email me, though, honestly, pastors.
Really?
Yeah, pastors who they're pastor in a small church in Jerkwater, Georgia. They're out in the middle of nowhere. They ain't got other pastors to talk to, and they're struggling, and they just want somebody to talk to.
Really?
And I'm thankful for that. I tell my elders, I share the emails with the elders. I say, this guy here. I just had him email just yesterday. Actually, a text message. I gave this guy my phone number. He's a pastor, and he just found out that the deacons are going to make him resign, and it's over doctrinal. It's over Calvinism.
Really?
And he contacted me about my video. I did a video on how I was almost fired over Calvinism in 2008. So it's been several years back for me, but it's still an open wound in some respects. So that hurt. That was a struggle. People, calling you a false teacher and everything else. Mm-hmm. And this guy reached out to me, and I'm not going to mention his name on here, but just pray. It's now his whole family and everything. They've got to move, figure out what they're going to do.
So, and that's a very serious thing. And so the humor ministry has opened up the door to, something very, very serious.
Yeah.
Just
and I'm
because
so thankful.
People can feel like they can connect with you.
Yeah.
And that's such a wonderful quality. I wish I was more honest. I was more like that. I'm not humorous.
I think you're pretty funny. You keep making fun of me.
Well, that's no.
To his credit, he has kept the joke.
I'm not going to say anything. Not going to say anything. We promised we wouldn't, but some things need to remain inside jokes.
Yes, we have an inside joke between us that will remain.
Yeah, right.
Hopefully next year it'll be double.
Yeah, we'll have to go to Chili's twice.
Yeah. Well, they'll be so happy to see us, they'll pay for us to come.
That's right. Well, I do want to talk to you at some point. We'll do another, whether it's a remote podcast, but I would like to explore. Your church that you grew up in wasn't always a Reformed Baptist church.
Nope.
And so, how far away were you from Reformed Baptist?
I wouldn't say as far as you could get, but about as far as you could get in the sense of, and I can tell this story pretty quick. We can do another show, but just so people understand what you're talking about. I grew up in this church, and now I'm the pastor of the church, but it's not the same church I grew up in. I came to this church in 1987. That's when my parents got divorced. My dad met my stepmom, got married, and I started going to church. It was a Disciples of Christ church, which if you're not familiar with that, that is part of the Campbellite movement, which was a movement out of the 1800s. It was Thomas and Alexander Campbell and Barton Stone created this movement called the Restoration Movement, which they believed they were restoring the ancient gospel. And the Stonite Campbellite movement, which has also been called, split into different versions. And you had the Churches of Christ, which are the very conservative, no instruments, very hardcore Church of Christ. And then you had sort of a middle of the road. If you ever see in your town, if you ever see a church called the Independent Christian Church, okay, that's Campbellite movement, but that's like middle of the road. That's sort of like that's like the SBC of the Campbellite movement. They're kind of middle of the road.
We get that.
Yeah. But on the far left, there's the Disciples of Christ. That's the very liberal version. Mm-hmm. Now, our church wasn't liberal in the social sense, but we were liberal in the theological sense. We had female elders. We had all that stuff. Growing up, that's just what I grew up with. And we had a pastor in the 80s who didn't even believe in the virgin birth. Now, thankfully, when the church found out about that, they removed him because they were conservative enough that wasn't going to stand. But that's how far the denomination was. And again, I didn't get saved in that church. I got saved sort of in spite of it because I was there, but I wasn't really hearing the gospel. In 99, I got saved. I got married and saved in the same year. But I got saved through the ministry of another man who shared the gospel with me. And then I never had, and this is going to sound so Pentecostal, so forgive me. Okay. I never felt released. I never felt like I could leave. The church was like, I grew up here and I have something to do here. Like God, because I had two job offers. One was to be associate pastor at a Southern Baptist church. Another one was actually not two jobs. The second one, they were going to offer me the job, but turned out they were Baptist-Costal. When they found out I didn't believe in speaking in tongues, they didn't like that, so they reneged on that one.
Baptist-Costals, I know some of them.
Yep. But it was through that God, the church paid for me to go to seminary, and they let me choose. So I chose a Baptist school. So I went to a Baptist college, Baptist seminary. And when I graduated, our pastor was retiring. So I took they hired me right out of seminary. 26 years old, new pastor. And my first thing I said was, I'm going to start preaching through books of the Bible. And I started preaching verse by verse through the Gospel of Luke.
That'll do it.
Yeah, it was it. I went through the Gospel of Luke. I was going through Romans in Sunday school, Luke in Sunday morning, and Wednesday night I was teaching basically like a very basic systematic theology. Mm-hmm. But that was what I was doing. And for 2 years, it went along fine. And in 2008, people started hearing the language of Calvinism because it was coming out of me because I was learning it and it was starting to become part of me. Yeah. And a group of people tried to have me removed, but they ended up leaving, and the church kept going in the direction we're going. So by 2011, we had become a Reformed church, and we changed our name.
Nice.
So God brought that's revival. Years of preaching the gospel and seeing God change people's hearts. That's revival.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's amazing. That's fantastic. And I do want to explore that with you more because I have come from not that far, but I was raised Arminian, fundamentalist. I mean, same things that Nathan was talking about tonight.
Yeah.
You know, just the IFB, KJVO, all of that stuff. And the Lord, it was through just reading the scriptures, and it was through, and by the time I was preaching, I was Calvinist, but I was still very much fundamentalist. I hadn't changed my eschatology or anything, but it was through preaching that even at this church that I began to be able to lead in that direction. And it cost me. It cost me a little bit of heartache. Nobody ever asked me to resign, but for the most part, God was gracious, and the majority of the church went along, and God has blessed by adding to us people of like mind. So I'd like to discuss that with you, but we'll wrap it up. I do want to thank you for being here. We have another podcast scheduled at 6:05, but I thank you for coming.
Absolutely.
And thank you for our budding friendship. And then also I want to mention that October 31st through November 2nd of next year, we are having a Semper Reformanda. I know it's a long way off, but these things come quick. You can go on Eventbrite, do a search, Winter Haven, Florida, Semper Reformanda. It'll come up. Register. You'll get to hear Keith Foskey. In the meantime, Behold Our God Conference. You can go to our YouTube page at Southside Baptist Church, and you can hear Keith preached a fantastic message on the holiness of God. And so, again, I think, is there anything you want to plug, anything you want to say?
Just that I'm thankful, and I'm putting it down now. I get Luther. Remember, you said I could come.
We'll have to discuss that. Yeah, you'll get Luther. We'll discuss the topics, because what I want to do, and you can bring Luther into this, because it's exactly what happened in the Reformation, because the church had been deformed by and large. And so what we want to hone in on is how the culture is deforming the church now, and what we are to do about it. I mean, do we nail some more thesis to
being a modern day Luther? I'll start working on it now.
Modern day Luther, start working on it. All right. Well, we appreciate your viewership, your listenership, all 6 of you, and you can find us on Spotify, iHeartRadio, YouTube, as well as our website at truthtoheart.com. Like, share, and subscribe. Comment down below if there's anything you'd like us to discuss. We're open to it, as we have special guests occasionally. But thank you for your viewership. And thank you, Keith.
Thank you, my brother.
Sir.